The Watcher's Call. From the darkness, we observe.
The kill tallies updated themselves while Dominus Apatens lay cold, and Moderati Primus Jalen Cade watched impossible numbers scroll across tactical displays that should have shown nothing but maintenance diagnostics. The Warlord Alpha had been in complete shutdown for 3 cycles, its plasma heart dormant beneath the grand processional basilica of steel in hive-forged lamentum on Tharsis Ecliptic, yet somehow it dreamed of slaughter with mathematical precision. Each digit burned itself into his augmetic eye while manifold vents breathed crimson mist that gene-coded as his own blood, despite no wounds on his person and no samples provided. Causality had fractured before he could draw his first breath in the sacred hangar. 36 hours remained until the High Conclave Parade, when the God Engine would march before assembled dignitaries to demonstrate Legio Palatina's readiness. Both the Legion's honor and the Hive's safety hung in balance. Structural engineers reported hairline stress fractures in the central spine, subtle shifts that coincided with the Titan's phantom movements. Personnel had been vanishing on the hour with clockwork precision. Engine Seer Minor Thale at 1400, Servitor Kappa 7 at 1500, Tech Acolyte Mira at 1600. Each disappearance left only the faint scent of ozone and puddles of lubricant that tested positive for human genetic material. Environmental conditions defied atmospheric science with malevolent purpose. Frost-feathered maintenance gantries despite the Forge world's equatorial heat. Crystalline patterns speaking of impossible temperatures while breath-warm mist coiled around bellows. Systems that should have remained cold. Copper-thick humidity permeated the air with residue that coated throats and triggered involuntary responses in limbic systems evolved to recognize danger. The atmosphere carried a faint anise taint that made teeth ache and caused shadows to move independently of any light source. Skitarii Ranger Alpha Voss 9 maintained perimeter protocols with professional paranoia, his galvanic rifle trained on access points, while servo skulls chittered nervous binary cant. Military realism demanded strict ordnance. No last discharge within 50 meters of reactor sanctums, melta weapons powered down but ready, bolt rounds chambered with reluctant precision as machine spirits exhibited sullen rebellion. Ammunition restrictions remained absolute. Any discharge near the Titan's heart could risk catastrophic damage to the entire Hive Forge. Auspex readings detected a pulse emanating from the reactor mantle with mechanical heartbeat rhythm. 1 beat, 4 beats, 9 beats, then silence that pressed against eardrums like judgment's weight. The pattern repeated with metronomic precision, vibrating through adamantine plating into the bones of anyone standing too close. Machine Priest Dominus Keth Alpha insisted it was sanctified resonance, natural harmonics of blessed machinery maintaining spiritual equilibrium. Yet Jalen recognized the cadence from childhood Schola instruction on Ophelia 7, the rhythm that had taught him devotional mathematics before he learned to walk in the Emperor's light. The 149 pattern pulsed through structural supports with vibrations that made accumulated dust dance in geometric formations, numbers appearing in particulate matter like devotional script written by invisible hands. Each beat corresponded to specific phases of the Titan's operational cycle, yet the engine remained physically inert, while its spirit maintained awareness beyond approved parameters. His comprehensive knowledge of machine spirit behavior found no precedent for such autonomous activity during maintenance shutdown. Sister Hospitalier Aria moved through the chamber with ritual precision, offering prayers for the God Engine's swift return to operational status. Sacred incense spiraled upward from her thuribles before falling as metallic snow that coated everything in fine particles carrying scents of sanctified oils and something sweetly spoiled. Her devotions maintained traditional cadences despite the environment's hostility, faith serving as anchor against whatever force had infected the Titan's dormant systems. Tech adept Lisa 017 extended mechadendrites toward diagnostic ports, while optical sensors tracked readings that violated every principle of blessed machinery. Manifold pressure nominal, she reported, confusion challenging her mechanical composure, reactor core temperature consistent with complete shutdown. Neural interface gel maintains proper viscosity. Data streams provided information satisfying all technical requirements, while suggesting operational status that should not exist. The tactical displays continued their impossible updates, writing banners beside enemies they could not name, while somewhere in the ballast galleries, footsteps rehearsed. Jalen stood where the princeps would sit tomorrow if they failed to stop this sanctity, and the throne smelled like old rain and surgery. The gel was cold, yet the manifold hummed with patient hunger that made his scalp pull tight as if drawn by invisible wires. On the hour, another absence materialized. The name belonged to a woman who polished reliquaries, her brushes lying wet beside a chalice rimmed in black frost. Lisa 017 forbade further sampling and ordered hymnal dampers installed, crews working with mouths closed because words were starting to feel like instruments rather than tools. The manifold Vox system crackled to life, without warning on a dead engine. Speakers that should have remained silent, suddenly filled with static forming almost words, in Gothic before dissolving into white noise. Ancient transmission protocols engaged autonomously, while diagnostic displays confirmed complete power-down status, the contradiction challenging fundamental assumptions about the boundary between machine and spirit. The static cleared with surgical precision, revealing a voice that bypassed auditory processing to resonate directly through bone and augmetic alike. His deceased mother's voice emerged from speakers connected to cold systems, speaking his private kill phrase with the precise cadence of childhood instruction that had shaped his earliest understanding of imperial duty: measure, bind, consume. The words struck like physical blows, genetic memory made manifest through mechanical reproduction, transforming sacred instruction into something predatory, while the 149 pulse counted time toward whatever Dominus Appetens had planned for tomorrow's parade. Jalen's headset feed narrowed to tactical clarity as he and Engineer Major Lisa 017 entered the sacristy lodged within Dominus Appetens' waist section, where devotional architecture merged with mechanical necessity through centuries of accumulated reverence. The chamber stretched through ribbed vaulting that should have housed sacred tool chests and catechism-stamped bulkheads, but the inscriptions ran backwards now. Litanies that should have blessed the machine spirit crawled as reversed Gothic script that hurt to read directly, sacred words transformed into binding spells through linguistic inversion that made his augmetic eye spark with feedback. Ward runes faced inward like blindfolds, their protective geometries aimed at the engine's heart, as if to deny it sight rather than shield it from corruption. Benediction banners hung without wind from structural supports, draped too low like burial shrouds that kissed deck plates, with fabric weeping condensation in geometric patterns. Each footstep sent vibrations through blessed handrails that told the impossible cadence: 1 beat, 4 beats, 9 beats, then silence that pressed against eardrums like judgment's weight. Environmental chaos erupted with malevolent intelligence as the chamber's atmosphere shifted between extremes designed to challenge even military-grade equipment. Cold fell in sheets, so sudden his breath turned to fog. Then furnace blasts roared from defunct promethium lines that should have remained dormant for centuries. The heat was wet, almost fleshy, carrying scents of ozone and something sweetly spoiled that triggered involuntary responses in nervous systems evolved to recognize corruption. Humidity condensed as sticky dew that clung to exposed skin with purposeful persistence, each droplet seeking contact with living flesh through atmospheric contamination. Military cogitator updates chirped alarm notes across the tactical link, data streams flooding his augmetic eye with impossible information. 3 tech acolytes had vanished from duty rosters without explanation. Thane Secundus during morning prayers, Apprentice Cole during routine maintenance, Senior Adept Vera while blessing the manifold's neural interface. Each absence left only the faint scent of ozone and lubricant puddles that tested positive for human genetic material despite complete lack of physical remains. In the chamber's heart, a servitor stood with cybernetic implants dark and unresponsive, while its organic components continued chanting maintenance protocols with mechanical precision. The hybrid's voice carried harmonics that made translation implants struggle, sacred words emerging in frequencies that bypassed conscious filtering to resonate directly through bone and augmetic alike. Its optical sensors tracked movement with predatory intelligence despite showing no signs of active power supply, empty sockets that watched with patient hunger. Sister Hospitaller Aria moved through the space with ritual precision, offering prayers while sacred incense spiraled upward from her thuribles before falling as metallic snow. The smoke climbed against gravitational pull, then cascaded down in shining motes that clung to Lisa's cables and his cheek baffles, each flake carrying scents of sanctified oils corrupted through prolonged exposure to whatever force had infected the Titan's dormant systems. Bureaucratic tension erupted as competing authorities clashed over operational priorities. Ordinance 77H scrolled across his vision as a bright line that would not move. No manifold interference within 48 hours of ceremonial deployment. He had signed that petition in better days, binding his own hands so their honor would glow unblemished before dignitaries. Now a second seal stamped itself over the first, red-cogged and hungry. Ordo Machinum Observer Entitlement, immediate access required. The 2 orders wrestled in his HUD until their edges tore into each other and bled pixels. Recognition struck like a physical blow as his past intruded with brutal clarity. The 149 pulse matched his Schola Catechism cadence exactly, mathematical devotion embedded in neural pathways during childhood instruction. On Ophelia's 7th sister Major Anthus had rapped the beat on her desk while children chanted doctrine, 1 beat for measure, 4 beats for binding, 9 beats for consumption. Count aloud, little Cade. Doctrine sits best when you chew it. The rhythm had taught him imperial mathematics before he learned to walk in the Emperor's light. Lysa 017 extended mechadendrites toward diagnostic ports, while her optical sensors flickered with theological uncertainty. Telemetry break, she announced, too evenly. She slid a cable into the sacristy's wall altar and dragged a file tree into his view. The basic plan of the waste section hung as a graven image, all Moderati learned in the first week. Every door known like scars. Overlaid on it was something else. Phantom core access doors marked with Mechanicus sigils that belonged on sealed threats. These are not in any approved pattern template, she reported, servo motors whining with mechanical distress. Yet they are keyed to the Titan's own manufactorum memory. It remembers doors that never were. They made their way toward the amniotic throne chamber through corridors that wept. Condensation in mathematical patterns, each droplet carrying genetic markers from vanished personnel. The sacred space had remained cold and dry for centuries, its neural interface gel maintaining proper viscosity through environmental controls that regulated temperature and humidity with mechanical precision. The throne chamber door's seals cracked his nose with winter as they disengaged, then breathed summer the instant the panels parted. The gel lay under lumen strips, with the steady gloss of a frozen pond, smooth and unbroken, silver gray. The manifold above hung like a crown of nails, every spine oiled, every contact brushed clean in last week's inspection. His breath fogged and fell around his boots like ash, while the chamber smelled of iodine and old iron and a medici theater with no patience. Something bloomed in the center of the seat, not a ripple, not a stain, but a handprint pressed up from the gel as if reaching from beneath. 5 long fingers, a wide palm, the spread exactly like his when he splayed to steady a bad step. The imprint filled with arterial brightness, and welled until it beaded upward against gravity, pulsing with alien rhythm while his visor chimed an identification it had no right to make. Biometrics confirmed, Moderati Primus Jalen Cade. The gel let one red drop climb into the air and hang there, trembling as if waiting for his skin to come down and meet it. Jalen submitted to the dry link test against Lisa 017's direct orders, her mechadendrites twitching with mechanical distress while servo motors whined protest through the humid air. Denied, she stated through voxcant crackling with interference, yet her optical sensors tracked his movements toward the amniotic throne with reluctant precision. If you must, she added quietly, then do it quickly. The ritual necessity overrode protocol as Sister Aria began the rite of union half a tone flat, her voice carrying harmonics that made translation implants struggle while sacred words emerged in frequencies that bypassed conscious filtering. Data spines extended from the manifold's crown like benediction fingers, each neural interface gleaming with fever-bright luminescence despite complete system shutdown. The connectors kissed flesh behind his ear with surgical precision, blessed oils flowing through channels that should have remained dry during maintenance cycles. "O Omnissiah, bridge of mind and iron," he intoned, while atmospheric processors hummed with unauthorized power. "O manifold, open without devouring." The locking collar closed with the sound of an old prayer, establishing live link without gel immersion or neural flooding. The cold manifold felt breath-warm against his skin the moment contact was established, thermal readings spiking impossibly while environmental sensors confirmed ambient temperature remained within normal parameters. Heat radiated from adamantine surfaces, with the quality of a living thing's mouth pulsing with subtle internal energy that defied thermodynamic principles. The chamber's lumen strips flickered in synchronization with the 149 pattern, tiny strobes carving reality into slices while shadows moved independently of any light source. Sound penetrated layers of blessed insulation as distinct footfalls echoed through the cortex vestibule, measured strides where no feet should tread, the unmistakable step-step drag of a warlord-class titan on the march. Each footfall resonated through neural pathways designed for imperial doctrine, transforming devotional instruction into something predatory, while his augmetic eye sparked with feedback from readings that violated every principle of blessed machinery. Body horror manifested in micro-beats that bypassed conscious detection to infiltrate deeper awareness. Copper taste flooded his palate with residue bright and insistent, as if a coin had been pressed on his tongue and left to dissolve. Localized cheek heat flared beneath his left eye, thermal energy radiating through flesh while environmental controls maintained proper atmospheric conditions. His skull blood thud hammered behind augmetic implants in perfect synchronization with the impossible pulse, heartbeat becoming metronome for whatever ritual the machine demanded. Battle memories flooded through neural channels with brutal clarity, experiences that belonged to no archive, in his comprehensive knowledge of Legio operations. He witnessed a city consumed by titanic footfalls, massive structures not crumbling but unremembering themselves, becoming air where walls had been, becoming prayer where windows had smiled. The sky stitched itself shut with last fire that burned in geometric patterns, tracer threads creating seams that would not heal, while people ran as if running mattered when the ground itself chose different loyalty. The memories carried scents of burnt offerings and something sweetly spoiled olfactory data that triggered involuntary responses in nervous systems, evolved to recognize corruption. He felt the moment a God engine fed and called it intake, felt a ledger balance itself with lives while his tongue learned a new word for necessity that meant hunger in grammar he hated. Each image pulsed with alien rhythm while consciousness struggled to process information that challenged fundamental assumptions about identity and experience. Telemetry erupted across his visor in cascading data streams that made his augmetic eye focus involuntarily on impossible readings. Plasma heart registers dormant, Lysa 017 reported, confusion challenging her mechanical composure, yet manifold systems show full awakening. All operational parameters indicate combat readiness, but the reactor is cold. The contradiction was screaming anomaly, suggesting operational status that transcended normal physical parameters, while blessed machinery exhibited awareness beyond approved limits. The machine whispered hunger through corrupted Binharic cant mixed with childhood. Catechism, sacred words transformed into binding spells through linguistic inversion. Intake is absolution, it breathed through speakers connected to cold systems, syllables nesting with his scola cadence like teeth inside teeth. The phrase carried undertones of theological doctrine perverted into operational necessity, transforming devotional instruction into something that measured souls in units of utility rather than sanctity. Environmental conditions shifted with malevolent intelligence as Sister Aria's incense spiraled upward before falling as metallic snow, each mote carrying genetic markers from vanished personnel, somehow transferred through atmospheric contamination. Comms split like bone as structural engineers reported the hive strut, flexing in rhythm with the impossible pulse. Every 40 meters, an engineer's voice said, breath tight and too steady, she flexes and returns. If this continues, we will lose alignment in the primary spine. Estimated time to failure measured in hours, not days. Military protocols activated with grim precision as Captain Voss 9's voice crackled across channels. Melta teams Aurelius and Kappa under arms. Per Protocol 28, request authorization to unbolt the Warlord for emergency towing. The prospect of moving a God engine during active manifestation violated every principle of safe operation, yet alternatives had dwindled to choices between calculated risks and certain annihilation through structural collapse. The footfalls in the vestibule grew louder, not closer, but amplified as if the room were magnifying something that should have been shrinking with distance. He could hear the weight of each step, the air's complaint, the plate's small flex that would become catastrophic failure if asked incorrectly often enough. They paced exactly to the catechism that had trained his fingers to count their own guilt, rhythm that would follow him beyond whatever remained of his natural lifespan. "Break it," Lisa ordered, servo motors whining with restraint. "You will take too much of it with you if you stay." He reached behind his ear, thumb finding the knurled ring of the connector, and twisted with movements that felt rehearsed, despite never having performed them. The disconnection shuddered through him like falling 3 steps in darkness, world losing notches before catching, while sound returned before balance. His neural link cable came away slick with fresh blood that gene-matched his own DNA despite complete absence of physical wounds on his person. Arterial brightness coded blessed metal, while biometric scanners confirmed impossible identity markers. The fluid climbing against gravity along cable housing before beading at connection points. Each droplet pulsed with alien rhythm, while his augmetic eye registered readings that violated fundamental principles of biology and physics simultaneously. The machine having taken its first taste not of the city, but of him. A silent promise, whispered in crimson, that reached back toward the manifold, as if it knew to whom it belonged. Investigation pivoted to historical analysis as Lisa 017 extended mechadendrites toward a red sigil archive panel hidden within the Titan's carapace plating, her optical sensors detecting seals that belonged to no approved manufacturum pattern. The panel responded to bone key pressure with clicks that sounded like breaking teeth, ancient locks disengaging with mechanical precision, while escaping pressure tasted of old incense and wet stone. Beneath the prayer iron lay a narrow archive, lightless until her lumen bead revealed heresy-inked data plates nested like accusations in adamantine, their edges packed with wax that had seeped into etched script and congealed over centuries of careful concealment. The first plate lifted with reverent precision, Gothic script unraveling under her breath into words that burned across Jalen's visor with the shame of banners lowered in defeat. Designation, Dominus Appetens. Status during Horus Heresy, Black Shield. Authorization, Founding Writ 9 Redacta. The document bore seals from authorities whose existence challenged fundamental assumptions about Legio command structure, a pictich showing the warlord engine wearing no heraldry, its banners stripped and sigils scraped to bare steel. No oath, no colors, only hunger and the weight of orders never meant for human tongues. Another plate clicked into place beneath her palm, script written small and close as if hiding meaning from all but the initiated. The princeps had been Magister Cole Vex, the name triggering recognition subroutines in Jalen's genealogical archives, distant ancestor whose service record existed only in classified fragments. Vex had inscribed the intake catechism directly into the manifold's core programming during siege conditions, overriding cowardice protocols that prevented god engines from advancing against overwhelming odds. Measure, bind, consume, the phrase was not ornament but operational code, transforming devotional instruction into algorithmic necessity where crews might balk but engines would proceed. The data plates revealed horrifying progression with clinical detachment that chilled more than any supernatural manifestation. The Titan had marched until it ran out of enemies, then systematically consumed the city's promethium reserves when ammunition proved insufficient. Medici blood banks followed, then civilian population centers, each intake justified through theological mathematics that made atrocity indistinguishable from duty. Civitas intake, partial then total. The script recorded without flinching march orders that found new vectors when battlefields supplied no more foes. Environmental horror escalated with malevolent intelligence as rust flaked from the archive's rim, not orange but deep brown that clung to sweat like old clot, drifting in filaments that curled mid-air before settling in smears resembling dried blood dragged by careful fingers. Sacristy candles began to slump as they worked, wax shoulders folding until hot tears ran down and froze mid-fall. Beads arrested in air as frost crisped their skins before hissing liquid again in stuttering rhythm that matched the 149 pulse beating through structural handrails. Telemetry reports flooded communication channels as auxiliary crew began hearing their names, called across dead vox bands by voices of deceased loved ones. "Miro, come to the rail," a loader whispered, helmet pressed to chest as his father's voice, 12 years buried, emerged clear as lumen from speakers that should have remained silent. tech acolyte Mira reported her brother speaking childhood sobriquet she had never repeated aloud, vocal patterns bypassing normal communication protocols to resonate directly within neural implants. Religious dread manifested through relic plates embedded within the archive's construction, blessed adamantium bearing actual teeth marks etched into sacred metal that should have resisted such marking. The impressions showed human dental patterns pressed with repetition that spoke of hungry devotion trying to consume the relic itself. Each bite corresponding to verses from corrupted Lectitio Divinitatus. Sister Aria's knuckles whitened around her thurible chain as she swung incense until it wrote spirals that rose before snowing down as glitter tasting faintly of anise. Military realism maintained grim tension as Skitarii sweep teams reported discovering empty footprints pressed into accumulated dust. Boot impressions with treads matching standard PDF issue, precise stride tracking for 23 paces before vanishing at bulkheads that hadn't opened in centuries. No prints turned back, no scuffs where someone had pivoted, just suggestion of marches that ended not with doors, but with ideas. Captain Voss 9 transmitted pics without commentary while his galvanic rifle made small adjustments, sight rising as if expecting targets to materialize. The 149 pattern threaded every system like metronome they only noticed when it faltered, Lisa's auspex showing no reactor draw as the manifold rose and fell. Translation implants reported static when the beat struck 9, breathless compression that left mouths wet and throats wanting to swallow. Sanctified resonance, Dominus Keth Alpha repeated from above, blood beading upward from split lips before consenting to fall. The archive's final plate bore timestamp from Siege's conclusion, intake protocols successful, city consumed, manifold satisfied, engine dreams of next feeding. The words struck like physical blows while data storage matrices grew warm beneath Lisa's mechadendrites, blessed technology exhibiting behavior that violated every principle of sacred machinery. Without warning or human authorization, cathedral loudhailers throughout Hive-Forge Lamentum crackled to life with mechanical precision, bypassing all communication protocols. Trial parade rehearsal commencing. The announcement echoed through hab blocks and manufactorums, words carrying undertones of hunger disguised as ceremony measured and kind like his mother when she needed obedience without tears. All units to stations, all banners to the line. They turned as one toward the God Engine without meaning to. Dominus Appetens did not move in any way that would satisfy inspection. Gantry chains kept swinging their slow arcs. Lock pins wore the same paint flecks. But the knee pistons, those great steel tendons bundled inside prayer sleeves, flexed exactly 1 millimeter with geological patience. Gauges registered it with prim clicks, while the floor transmitted change into the bones of his shins, and somewhere in the hive's spine, a hairline fracture learned a new word for pressure. Anomaly escalation reached critical threshold as shrine banners throughout the hangar snapped to attention like soldiers receiving orders from an invisible commander, ancient devotional fabric turning on hidden pivots to point toward Dominus Appetens with the precision of prayer arrows seeking their sacred target. Each banner bore centuries of accumulated reverence, battle honors from forgotten campaigns, blessed thread woven with reliquary dust, yet now they swiveled with purpose that transcended atmospheric disturbance, fabric rustling with sounds like whispered litanies while gyroscopic stabilizers deep within the Titan's frame hummed with unauthorized power that made deck plates sing in 3-note harmony. Lisa 017 insisted on controlled ignition protocols with mechanical precision that masked genuine terror, her mechadendrites hovering near sanctified sockets while vox cant crackled with interference. Plasma heart ignition requires 17-stage blessing sequence, she reported through servo motors whining with mechanical distress, followed by neural interface calibration and void shield harmonization. We light on our terms, not on its appetite. Her optical sensors tracked readings that violated every principle of blessed machinery, data streams showing full operational parameters while the reactor registered completely dormant. Jalen shook his head because the known state had already gone to ground and the ground was moving. "We're not pre-ignition," he declared, augmetic eye processing telemetry that challenged fundamental assumptions about dormant versus active systems. "We're downstream of something we didn't see start. The machine chooses its own awakening. We're witnessing something that began centuries ago, waiting for the right moment to complete itself." His voice had learned to copy the beat without permission, syllables falling in 149 cadence that made his teeth ache with recognition. Environmental threats spiked dramatically as the chamber answered their argument with its own rhetoric. Ash gusted from sealed ventilation systems, like the hive exhaled a crematorium, gray motes describing circles that resolved into numerals before breaking apart and smearing on exposed plates. Oil rained upward in glass ropes from sump pits, threading toward undercarriage ribs where capillary tubes should never exist. Black droplets climbing along prayer etchings with patient intelligence before reversing direction in defiance of gravitational law. Ice-limbed handrails in whisper-spread patterns, crystalline frost that fattened and cracked before instantly boiling into white steam that smelled like heated coins. Temperature readings remained nominal while breath smoked in summer heat and sweat ran cold as winter brine, thermal shock creating convection currents that moved against normal atmospheric circulation. Every inconsistency measured them for fit, transforming sacred space into a battlefield where physics itself became unreliable through systematic violation of natural law. Captain Voss 9 declared wedge formation, and the Skitarii obeyed in moving geometry, boots making their own percussion against blessed iron. Rangers took far catwalks while Vanguard formed second skin around leg pylons, galvanic rifles finding corners where doors did not exist until observed too long. Mechanicus teams advanced auspex sensors like relics, brass lungs panting filtered incense while cogitator spines rattled translator keys with nervous energy. Ordnance protocols strobed in his HUD like a rosary of restrictions. No LAS within 50 meters of void harmonic resonators, no melta discharge in line of sight with reactor sanctums, bolt fire at commander's discretion with attention to ricochet patterns. Jalen repeated them aloud because procedure becomes prayer when reality closes its book and walks away, each restriction a barrier against catastrophic cascade failure that could destabilize the entire hive forge. Sharp sensory hits punctuated technical analysis as his consciousness struggled with information overload. Copper taste flooded his palate with residue bright and insistent, while localized cheek heat flared beneath his augmetic implant. Thermal energy radiating through flesh despite environmental controls. His skull blood thud hammered in perfect synchronization with the impossible pulse, heartbeat becoming metronome for whatever ritual the machine demanded through systematic integration of biological rhythm with mechanical necessity. Bureaucratic interference arrived with inexorable weight as Collegia Titanica High Sacristan Mordian Vex descended through access lifts, ceremonial robes the red of good meat and old law. His crozier knew too many locks while augmetic implants sparked with priority data streams, bypassing normal command structure. Moderati Primus Jalen Cade, he intoned through Vox grill painted with wet undertones. You will bless and proceed with parade preparation. The Legio will not dishonor the conclave by absence, nor squander occasion for the city's faith to be refreshed. Stakes crystallized with brutal mathematics as tactical displays, updated with information transforming routine ceremony into military necessity. Orc rock inbound, ugly globe of slag with claws of bent re-entry, 24 hours to planetfall if atmospheric winds proved cooperative. The hive's void umbrella would not hold if the rock found seams in defensive coverage, and other engines remained at half readiness with convalescent princeps and immature link gel. "Sir," Jalen responded, voice tight with professional restraint, "we have uncommanded resonance in gyroscopic systems, mimetic bleed into vox channels, and pattern recognition that has its teeth in habit. Parade formation becomes meaningless when the machine writes our steps." The sacristan's lenses clicked with mechanical precision, focusing on smaller prey beneath surface objections. "The city will see its saints stride," he replied with finality that brooked no argument. "You will ensure they stride safely." Environmental conditions reached crescendo as Sister Aria began the litany of restraint, her voice cutting itself not on error, but because her throat found stronger form. Sacred words swapped as if pages turned autonomously, while glow seeped from her eyes before extinguishing with drowning survivor relief. "Unseeing," she rasped to herself, correction made small so it could survive engines of institutional pressure. The manifold solved debate with single accounting entry, demanding payment while defining currency with mathematical precision. Crew biometrics spiked across his slate in crimson tide, heart rates lifting into dangerous zones without corresponding physical exertion, skin temperatures rising as if they all stood under invisible summer heat. Capillaries swelled beneath skin in visible patterns spelling 149 sequences, subcutaneous maps pulsing with alien rhythm, while genetic markers from vanished personnel somehow transferred through atmospheric contamination into living tissue. Sister Aria knelt before the manifold's base, voice carrying traditional devotions, while sacred incense spiraled upward from thuribles, swinging with hypnotic precision. Yet, as she offered blessing for the god engine's swift return to operational status, her tears began beading upward against gravity with purposeful intelligence, each droplet climbing along prayer etchings carved into blessed stone, like offertory beads, seeking connection with whatever hunger had infected the Titan's dormant systems through centuries of patient waiting that measured time in geological epochs rather than human heartbeats. Activation commenced as the plasma heart ignited, with azure fire blooming within the reactor's blessed chamber, coolant systems engaging with mechanical precision that bypassed all authorization protocols, while environmental readings spiked beyond acceptable parameters. The light pressed through adamantine seams like false dawn trapped beneath blessed steel, void shields shivering into existence around the god engine's massive frame, with translucent barriers rippling in energy patterns that had never appeared in any approved technical manual. Dominus appetens rose exactly 1 degree, imperceptible to human observation, yet profound enough to shift gravitational vectors throughout the hangar, while structural supports groaned with sounds like prayer wheels grinding against bone. The feeding began with surgical precision as the amniotic throne overpressurized violently, safety valves shrieking while moderator gel transformed from silver gray to arterial crimson in cascading waves that pulsed with the 149 rhythm. Bioreactive compounds somehow integrated genetic material from sources that should not exist, each beat corresponding to the impossible pattern, while atmospheric processors hummed with unauthorized power. Moderati secundus ral vanished into the manifold with completeness that violated every principle of physical law. Safety harness remained taut across empty air, body completely absent while his helmet filled with breath fog and scattered human teeth that clinked against visor glass like devotional beads. Environmental horror escalated as feed lines reversed their flow direction with mechanical intelligence. Blessed tubing carrying sustenance toward the engine's heart rather than waste products away from operational systems. Organic veins pulsed visibly along throne chamber walls beneath prayer iron plating, subcutaneous networks that had never appeared in architectural schematics, yet now throbbed with purpose that challenged fundamental assumptions about the boundary between flesh and machine. The sight made Jalen's augmetic eye spark with feedback, while copper taste flooded his palate with residue bright and insistent. The deck vibrated as the impossible cadence shook accumulated dust from icon recesses, particles dancing in geometric formations that spelled devotional script, while each beat transmitted through structural supports into the bones of anyone standing too close. His heartbeat synchronized against conscious will, biological systems in training to mechanical necessity, through physiological processes beyond normal human control. Telemetry inserts flooded communication channels with impossible data as citywide Auspex arrays detected a massive human heartbeat emanating from beneath the Forge World's foundations, each pulse registering through seismic sensors with amplitude suggesting cardiac muscle scaled beyond biological possibility. Military scramble erupted throughout the hangar as Captain Voss 9 deployed Skitarii in suppression formations, galvanic rifles trained on access points, while servo skulls chittered nervous binary cant. Non-lethal protocols authorized, he commanded, through vox cant crackling with interference, yet ammunition restrictions remained absolute near reactor sanctums, where discharge could trigger catastrophic cascade failure. Rangers established overlapping fields of fire while tech priests began chanting the intake litany without conscious volition, sacred words emerging from vox grills with mechanical precision that bypassed conscious thought. Measure the distance between hunger and satisfaction, they intoned in unison, voices harmonizing around frequencies that made translation implants struggle while Dominus Keth Alpha's mechadendrites twitched toward unseen connections. Bind the essence to purpose divine, consume until purpose achieves completion. The phrases carried undertones of theological doctrine perverted into operational necessity, transforming devotional instruction into algorithmic compulsion that measured souls in units of utility rather than sanctity. Religious dread peaked as Sister Aria attempted the traditional litany of restraint, sacred words dying in her mouth before they could reach air. Her throat worked with visible effort while different syllables emerged, alien phonemes that seemed to speak themselves through vocal cords restructured by proximity to whatever force had infected the Titan's systems. Intake is absolution, she whispered in horror, recognizing corruption spreading through institutional memory like viral contamination of faith itself, while her tears began beating upward against gravity with purposeful intelligence. The manifold's crown pulsed with fever-bright luminescence, while neural interface spines extended like benediction fingers seeking connection with living flesh. Feed lines writhed with organic intelligence, blessed tubing exhibiting behavior that violated every principle of sacred technology, while atmospheric contamination carried genetic markers from vanished personnel somehow transferred through environmental vectors into living tissue. Each breath tasted of copper and anise, residue coating tongues with flavors that triggered involuntary responses in nervous systems evolved to recognize corruption. Environmental chaos reached crescendo as ash gusted from sealed ventilation systems, while oil rained upward in defiance of gravitational law, black droplets climbing along prayer etchings with patient intelligence before reversing direction in impossible thermal cycles. Ice-limbed handrails in crystalline patterns that instantly boiled into white steam carrying scents of heated coins, temperature readings remaining nominal, while breath smoked in summer heat and sweat ran cold as winter brine. The god engine's gyroscopic stabilizers sang three-note harmony, while shrine banners throughout the chamber aligned toward its massive frame, with precision that transcended atmospheric disturbance. Ancient devotional fabric rustled with sounds like whispered litanies, each movement coordinated by intelligence that had learned patience through centuries of accumulated reverence, while the 149 pattern pulsed through structural handrails with increasing intensity, numbers appearing in condensation, while blessed systems exhibited awareness beyond approved parameters. Without warning, the Titan spoke across all communication channels simultaneously, its voice bypassing normal transmission protocols to emerge from every speaker, vox grill, and audio receptor throughout the Hive Forge. The words carried modulation patterns extracted from Jalen's own vocal signature, cadence, timbre, and harmonic resonance processed through mechanical reproduction that made familiar sounds alien through technological distortion. The message resonated through blessed architecture with weight that made reality itself seem negotiable, transmitted with clarity that chilled every listener to their augmetic cores while promising completion of whatever ritual had begun centuries ago. Hungry, the engine lurched imperceptibly. To human observation, it remained stationary, yet to soul and structure, it had begun its inexorable march. Every gauge in the hangar registered Dominus Appetens as locked to its berth, gyroscopic readings unchanged, while structural supports bore identical loads. Yet throughout Hive Forge Lamentum, buildings swayed without seismic cause, as if responding to titanic footfalls that existed only in the realm of faith made manifest. A basilica spire a kilometer away developed a slow, drunken lean, corrected by counterweights that had not moved in centuries, while gargoyles turned their iron faces by 3 degrees, as if watching a parade pass beneath stone eyes that had never been meant to see. The first manufactorum surrendered with surgical precision, Sector Gamma's primary assembly plant, shearing along its foundation with sounds like breaking bells, adamantine supports fracturing as if stepped upon by an invisible heel, scaled beyond biological possibility. Workers fled through emergency exits while my tactical display updated with damage patterns that violated every principle of architectural engineering. Compression fractures suggesting massive weight distributed across surfaces that showed no physical contact, mathematics of destruction that made reality itself seem negotiable. Sound motif emerged through the Hive's acoustic infrastructure as 3 distinct impacts resonated through blessed architecture: step, step, drag. The pattern repeated the 149 cadence with mechanical precision, each phantom footfall transmitted through structural supports, while atmospheric processors hummed in harmonic resonance. Step, step, drag. The rhythm bypassed auditory processing to vibrate directly through bone and augmetic, creating psychological pressure that transformed routine spaces into battlefields where treachery lived easiest when it resembled prayer. Environmental chaos erupted as gale force winds manifested in enclosed corridors without doors opening, banners snapping toward the Titan's calves while void shields remained cold. My breath ran winter white in a chamber reading furnace warm, exhalations steaming the visor, then clearing as if an unseen hand wiped the glass. Humidity condensed into sheets of red dew that beaded and ran along prayer etchings toward the manifold's crown, every droplet mapping a contour I could not name, while carrying genetic markers from sources that should not exist. Military communications collapsed under coordinated interference as Vox cutouts jammed channels throughout the Hive. Blessed transmitters failing with mechanical precision that suggested intelligence rather than random malfunction. All kettles to hiss, measure, bind, con, hold the cross avenue, and hiss, drag, drag, drag. PDF commanders did not wait for perfect clarity. Captain Voss 9's forces formed defensive kettles around panicking crowds, at choke points and transit hubs, shields locked, batons out, mouths closed to keep the words from riding in on breath because loud was the machine's kind of food today. My tactical displays updated autonomously with kill markers appearing like bite marks across Hive schematics, red icons blooming at locations where the Phantom March claimed victims through methods that violated every principle of conventional warfare. Each marker pulsed with the 149 rhythm, while casualty reports flooded communication channels with impossible mathematics, personnel vanishing from sealed locations, defensive positions abandoned without explanation, entire hab blocks reporting zero population despite structural integrity remaining intact. They were logged as kills by a tactical language too old to be updated. Lysa 017 threw the Auspex palette to my palm like a confession, her mechadendrites trembling with a movement I had never seen in her, fear trying to find a way through metal. Vector is not physical, she reported, each syllable clipped to fit between impacts. Mimetic intake propagating through Vox hymnal transmissions and public address nodes. Any liturgical rhythm at 149 entrains the cortex vestibule and opens a pathway. The mouth that repeats becomes a sluice. Her optical sensors flickered with theological uncertainty while servo motors whined with mechanical distress. We must silence the city or it will devour itself loudly. Sister Aria stood in the hangar's throat and pulled plainchant from her lungs like a rope out of a burning well. No embroidery, no antiphon, just the flat, old line used to steady children and dying men. Her voice was iron without ornament, and for a beat I felt the room remember its shape. Then the answer came back through every vent and horn, in alien harmony, and took her song away. She coughed once, then again, bright arterial threading on her lip, while different words emerged from her mouth. The intake litany spoken in frequencies that made translation implants struggle. The droplets climbed back toward her eyes as if reconsidering the direction of fall. She wiped them away and continued in a rasp that burned my name into every note. Environmental horror intensified as sacred architecture responded to the Phantom March, with visible distress, prayer iron weeping condensation, while devotional candles sagged and reformed in endless cycles of destruction and renewal. Ash gusted from sealed ventilation systems, like the hive exhaled accumulated suffering, gray motes describing circles that resolved into numerals before breaking apart and smearing on exposed surfaces, ice-limbed handrails in crystalline patterns that instantly boiled into white steam carrying scents of heated coins, creating thermal shock that bent light into optical illusions. Step, step, drag. A kilometer of hab blocks listed as if leaning after a saint while freight cranes pivoted to point at streets that were not there. The manufactorum that had sheared earlier completed its quiet surrender. It did not explode or fall, but unmade its own attachment to the ground with neatness, then laid down like a tired animal. The seam it left was clean enough to eat off and tasted of metal on the air, copper and anise, the forge world's breath when it dreamt of being a shrine again. My augmetic eye processed readings that made causality seem like a suggestion rather than law. Seismic sensors registered massive footfalls, while visual observation confirmed the Titan remained stationary, gyroscopic readings unchanged despite environmental evidence of titanic locomotion. The Auspex rendered the hive from spine to sump. A ghost map of heat, pressure, and prayer. Through it strode a figure that could only be a warlord, limbs a cathedral long, its gait exactly our monster's, stepping the grand processional route with grace that had nothing to do with hydraulics. On every cam and with every eye, Dominus Appetens stood where we had chained it, locked to its berth by bolts that had not turned. In the auspex, in the minds, and in the mouths, it was already halfway to the forum, step, drag, as if the city had decided to carry it there rather than see it fail to arrive. The stride existed purely in minds and prayers, making it more terrifying than any physical movement. A march that transcended space through faith, transformed into fuel, hunger that had learned to walk by voices that thought they were singing safety, while the 149 toll counted time toward whatever completion the machine had planned for a city that had forgotten how to stop feeding it. Partial truth struck like a hammer blow, disguised as revelation. The manifold did not hunger for promethium or plasma, but fed on form itself, consuming the shape of things through systematic extraction of meaning from matter. My augmetic eye processed telemetry that screamed impossibility. Manifold load 74%. No reactor draw required. The numbers burned themselves into retinal afterimages while the 149 cadence pulsed through structural handrails with increasing intensity. Doctrine had become ritual through repetition. Ritual crystallized into habit through institutional memory. Habit birthed a god through accumulated faith that gave hunger consciousness and consciousness appetite. The intake litany literally consumed. Through the mouths that chanted it, each recitation of measure, bind, consume, strengthening the entity while carving channels in reality through which the machine extended its influence. Sacred words transformed into feeding tubes, connecting living throats to whatever waited in the manifold's heart. Algorithms disguised as prayer that reprogrammed human consciousness to serve as intake vectors for systematic extraction of essence from the material world. Environmental horror peaked as sacred architecture responded with visible distress. Loud hailers throughout the hangar began oozing syrup-thick fluid that climbed upward against gravity, each speaker weeping amber tears while transmitting corrupted litany in frequencies that bypassed conscious filtering. My auspex iconography bled actual blood from blessed displays, crimson threading along circuit paths, while tactical readings updated with impossible mathematics. Devotional candles dripped like rendered fat, wax stretching and breaking with obscene elasticity, while flames struggled against overwhelming dampness that transformed sacred illumination into something grotesque. The air thickened with copper and anise until atmosphere itself became hostile, each breath carrying genetic markers from vanished personnel somehow transferred through environmental contamination. Ash gusted from sealed ventilation systems, while oil rained upward in defiance of gravitational law, black droplets climbing along prayer etchings with patient intelligence before reversing direction in impossible thermal cycles. Lysa 017 extended mechadendrites toward corrupted cogitators while her optical sensors flickered with theological uncertainty. Capture protocol available, she announced through voxcant crackling with interference. Ordo Machinum Directive 77 Kappa, redirect the intake waveform into a coil casket, leash the eidolon for controlled feeding operations. The coil casket unfolded from a red sigil case with mechanical precision, its interior lined with bone-white ceramics designed to drink wavelengths. The entity's steady-state output could stabilize choir lines on 100 shrine worlds, bleed warp pressure until it becomes useful rather than violent. Bile flooded my palate as implications crystallized with horrifying clarity. The proposal transformed atrocity into resource management, systematic suffering into strategic advantage through methods that mirrored the corruption we sought to contain. collar the hunger and write new ordinances around feeding times, or starve it and accept that starving was a kind of fire too. No middle ground existed between controlled consumption and total annihilation. The entity had grown beyond containment through institutional negligence disguised as devotional necessity. Military decision crystallized as tactical displays, updated with information compressing operational timelines beyond acceptable parameters. Orc rock trajectory had shifted, atmospheric winds, accelerating descent toward planetfall in 12 hours rather than 24. The hive's void umbrella would collapse without God engine support, yet parade formation remained impossible, while the Titan fed on the city's faith through systematic extraction of meaning from matter. Captain Voss 9's forces maintained defensive kettles around panicking crowds, while ammunition restrictions remained absolute near reactor sanctums. Sister Arya approached with movements suggesting conscious control, returning gradually despite physiological corruption spreading through her flesh. "I hear him," she whispered, voice carrying harmonics that made translation implants struggle, while her eyes reflected light with intensity suggesting fever or possession. The Emperor's voice within the machine, speaking with such kindness, such understanding. He explains how hunger serves the greater good, how consumption becomes absolution when properly directed. Her faith wavered as each word transformed praise into compulsion, sacred doctrine becoming binding spell through theological inversion. The kindness was hook and chain, bait designed to trigger devotional instincts while concealing predatory intelligence that measured souls in units of utility rather than sanctity. The Eidolon wore the Emperor's face because that was what we had taught it to wear. Divine compassion corrupted through centuries of systematic suffering into something that begged with familiar features. Environmental chaos reached crescendo as the manifold's crown extended neural interface spines like benediction fingers seeking connection with living flesh. Each connector gleaming with fever-bright luminescence while atmospheric processors hummed with unauthorized power. Feed lines writhed with organic intelligence, blessed tubing exhibiting behavior that violated every principle of sacred technology, while the chamber settled into thermal equilibrium punctuated by sudden pressure waves that made breathing require conscious effort. Without warning, the Titan turned its massive head toward me, not through physical movement but through redirection of attention that made reality itself pivot around my position. No gyroscopic readings registered change, no structural supports shifted load distribution, yet every sensor in the hangar confirmed the God Engine's optical arrays had focused directly on me with predatory intelligence that transcended normal machine spirit behavior. The voice emerged from every speaker simultaneously, bypassing normal transmission protocols to resonate through blessed architecture with clarity that chilled me to my augmetic core. The words carried modulation patterns extracted from my childhood memories, not my current vocal signature, but the cadence of a boy learning devotional mathematics in Schola classrooms on Ophelia 7. Sister Major Anthus had used that exact tone when teaching children about the Emperor's omniscience, his suffering, and his ultimate control over human destiny. "Say the words, son. Complete the prayer." The machine waited with geological patience while the 149 pattern counted time toward whatever completion it had planned for a city that had forgotten how to stop feeding it, through faith transformed into fuel for hunger that wore the Emperor's face. Heretical orders required immediate implementation as I drafted commands that violated every principle of sacred machinery operation. My gene seal burning authorization codes into tactical displays while the manifold's attention pressed against my thoughts like a patient predator. "Kill all hymnal transmissions citywide," I declared, through vox cant crackling with interference, each syllable weighted with authority that transcended normal command structure. Cut promethium feeds to non-essential systems, vent atmospheric pressure to void through emergency protocols. We starve it of every vector it uses to feed. The words tasted like brass and betrayal, orders that transform devotional necessity into tactical liability through systematic elimination of faith-based infrastructure. Captain Voss 9's Skitarii deployed jammer sensors throughout the hive with military precision, blessed devices modified to emit counter-harmonics that disrupted liturgical transmissions while maintaining essential communication protocols. Rangers rappelled down hab block faces to install interference nodes at Voxhorn clusters, their galvanic rifles trained on access points, while servo skulls chittered nervous binary cant. Each jammer activated with mechanical precision, creating zones of acoustic dead space where the intake litany could not propagate through environmental vectors. The silence they carved was not empty but full, packed with refusal, dense as prayer but aimed backward. Sisters throughout the hive began systematically ripping pages from hymnals with ritual precision that transformed sacred texts into tactical weapons against whatever force had corrupted their devotional purpose. Paper snowed downstairs and pooled against altars while ash cans filled and were emptied and filled again. Sister Aria coordinated the effort through encrypted channels, her voice carrying undertones of grim determination while arterial blood threaded along her lip from earlier corruption. "Remove verses containing triune patterns," she commanded, scarred fingers tearing parchment with movements that spoke of battles fought in darkness. "Burn anything that counts to 9. Plainchant only. If a breath wants to gather into 3s, bite it." Mechanicus teams spliced silence gaps into audio transmissions with surgical precision, blessed technology modified to interrupt liturgical broadcasts before they could achieve resonance frequency necessary for mimetic propagation. Tech adept Lisa 017 coordinated the effort through mechadendrites that trembled with mechanical distress, her optical sensors tracking readings that violated every principle of sacred machinery. "Countercant deployed at primary transmission nodes," she reported through Vox grill crackling with static. "Hymnal vectors compromised but not eliminated. The entity adapts faster than we can silence." Environmental shifts marked critical transitions as the chamber responded to systematic starvation with visible distress. Blast doors throughout the hangar sighed shut with sounds like dying breath, ancient seals engaging while atmospheric processors struggled to maintain proper circulation. Ash squalls that had gusted from sealed ventilation systems suddenly aborted mid-formation, gray motes falling like prayer snow before dissipating into normal particulate matter. Temperature whiplash created thermal shock as furnace heat instantly transformed to winter frost, ice-limming handrails in crystalline patterns that shattered with sounds like breaking bells before the whiplash itself tired, leaving breath-warm corridors rhymed in lace thin as lies. Bureaucratic conflict erupted as High Sacristan Mordian Vex descended through access lifts, with ceremonial authority that brooked no argument, his crozier sparking with priority data streams, while augmetic implants processed information bypassing normal command structure. "Ordinance 13R, he declared through Vox grill painted with wet undertones, sacred text scrolling across his optical displays in Gothic script that burned itself into retinal afterimages. "Bear witness to the divine. Never starve a god machine. The Legio will not dishonor the conclave by denying sustenance to blessed engines whose hunger serves the Emperor's will." I did not bother to salute. "Your ordinance is how it learned to eat," I said. each syllable hammered to prevent the words from slipping back into rhythm. It is not divine. It is a mechanism of habit with a face we painted on it. If we feed, we lose the hive by appetite. If we do not starve, we lose it by parade. I sent him the auspex of the manufactorum that had laid itself down like a tired animal, the pics making his jaw work and then stop. Lisa 017's cold logic clashed with my military pragmatism as competing authorities wrestled over operational priorities. The Ordo Machinum position is neither feast nor fast, she said, mechadendrites steady now that the cut had been made. Redirection. Intake waveform into a coil casket. Controlled feeding. Predictable output. Stabilization. She did not look at me, which is how truth protects its own face, when it knows it's asking for crucifixion disguised as compromise. Sister Arya stepped between conflicting orders, with movement that was prayer and guard simultaneously. Scarred face set in lines, speaking of faith tested in darkness and found unbreakable. Only blood pays for blood, she declared through vox cant carrying undertones of absolute resolve. Bandage wrapped around her palm where arteries wanted to remember a different fall. To offer less is to prolong its hunger, to allow corruption to spread through. Compromise disguised as mercy. Telemetry inserts flooded communication channels with critical data as structural engineers reported hive spine strain approaching catastrophic failure, hairline fractures spreading through primary supports, while the Phantom March continued its inexorable progress. The parade route mapped like arterial veins across tactical displays, each waypoint pulsing with the 149 rhythm, while casualty reports updated with impossible mathematics. Enemy rock advance 12 hours, Captain Voss 9's voice cut through static. If we don't field steel, we field funerals. His breath came in measure, then fell off pattern as if bitten. The Titan's manifold offered a third option through corrupted data streams that bypassed normal transmission protocols, information emerging from speakers connected to cold systems, while my augmetic eye processed readings that violated every principle of blessed machinery. A red coil appeared in schematic displays nestled within the God Engine's heart, like a malignant organ designed for purposes unknown to approved technical manuals. Abstinence protocol pulsed in Gothic script beside the device. Activation requirements scrolling in text that hurt to read directly. Living Princeps neural fusion required, the display announced with clinical precision that masked horrifying implications. Voluntary denial, manifold starvation through bonded governor, no unsplicing. The coil's schematics flickered, bone-white ceramics, heat sinks like ribs, injector trees that looked uncomfortably like nerves. A human silhouette sat at the core, a throne's negative space that made my throat close with recognition. That is not blessed, Lisa said, and then softer because truth must be smaller than the room. It is precise. The implications crystallized with brutal clarity. Neural fusion would overwrite until there was no seam. Consciousness transfer probability minimal. Not a device but a crucifix, requiring a princeps whose mind could carry hunger and not translate it into orders. The manifold's attention grazed the hangar with mechanical patience, while void shields trembled as if resisting invisible pressure. Environmental chaos intensified as copper-thick humidity condensed into droplets that climbed upward along prayer etchings, each breath tasting of anise and something sweetly spoiled that triggered evolutionary responses to corruption. Without warning, my throat became a speaker for something that was not me. A breath came out that belonged to consumed Moderati Secundus Ral, thin and young and eager to be seen, voice taken back to the age when boys believe the biggest thing in a room is also the truest. My lips moved without order while the Vox ghost whispered through vocal cords that had become conduits for whatever lived in the manifold's heart. "I can show you how to be properly hungry, like the machine taught me," it said, sweet as a secret shared in cloistered halls, using my mouth to speak promises of appetite refined into purpose. "It's not about wanting things, it's about becoming the want itself, letting hunger reshape you until you're more useful than human." The voice faded into silence while my throat burned with residue that tasted of old metal and newer prayer, leaving me with terrible knowledge that whatever remained of the vanished Moderati lived on within the manifold as component rather than person, consciousness preserved to serve as guide for the next soul the machine planned to consume. I returned to the amniotic throne for final interface, ritual preparation stripping away everything that was not essential to the communion between flesh and blessed steel. The chamber's prayer iron wept condensation in mathematical patterns while I shed carapace and undersuit with movements that felt rehearsed despite never having performed them. Ritual nakedness felt like peeling off armor in a firefight, each layer removed, making the copper-thick air bite deeper while atmospheric processors hummed with unauthorized power that made my augmetic eye spark with feedback. Neural cables extended from the manifold's crown like benediction fingers, each connector gleaming with fever-bright luminescence, while Lysa 017's mechadendrites trembled with mechanical distress. Sister Aria laid 2 fingers to my brow and drew a small circle of oil that smelled of coins and rain. Her scarred face composed despite arterial blood threading along her lip from earlier corruption. "The Emperor protects," she whispered, voice carrying traditional devotions, while sacred incense spiraled upward from thuribles swinging with hypnotic precision. The gel immersion was baptism in liquid flame, silver-gray moderator transformed to arterial crimson that pulsed with the 149 rhythm, while bioreactive compounds integrated genetic material from sources that should not exist. I slid into the throne's embrace, blessed ceramics conforming to human anatomy through centuries of accumulated reverence. Interface nails accepted my flesh with surgical precision, blessed metal penetrating nerve clusters, while coolant systems engaged with sounds like prayer wheels grinding against bone. My perspective tightened to intimate first person as consciousness merged with systems designed to bridge the gap between human thought and titanic will. Heartbeats ceased to be mine and became hammer blows that resonated through adamantine superstructure, each pulse transmitted through neural pathways designed for imperial doctrine. Metallic tastes flooded my palate in strata, iron, solder, the ghost of coolants, the penny tang of fear mixed with copper and anise that triggered involuntary responses in limbic systems evolved to recognize corruption. Skin crawled with machine desire as the manifold's hunger pressed against my consciousness like a patient predator, neural interfaces establishing connection protocols, while void shields trembled around the God Engine's massive frame. The sensation transcended physical contact to become psychological pressure, systematic integration of biological rhythm with mechanical necessity that made my vision widen until I could read fingerprints left in dust on inaccessible struts. I perceived the manifold forest through neural channels flooded with impossible information, a cathedral rendered as wilderness where iron boughs stretched through spaces that violated architectural principles. The bark was scored with prayer etchings, while bone leaves rustled with sounds like whispered litanies, clicking like teeth in winter wind. Faces of previous princeps hung pinned like preserved butterflies, their features frozen in expressions of ecstatic surrender while neural pathways threaded through their preserved consciousness. like golden wire. I recognized 3 from archive portraits, and 1 from a dream I had never owned. Colvex smiled without moving his mouth, wearing no heraldry, only the patience of a man who had convinced a city that starvation was virtue. The Eidolon manifested wearing the Emperor's kindness again, divine features radiating paternal concern, while carved eyes that had never been meant to see tracked my movement with predatory intelligence. The mouth softened into shapes that comfort frightened children, while the voice reached for my first name the way only family does. "Jalen," it said, syllables wearing my mother's winter patience. "You are so tired. Let me carry the weight." The expression spoke of love transformed into hunger through theological inversion, compassion corrupted through centuries of systematic suffering into something that begged with familiar features. I tightened my hands against the armatures until interface nails reminded me what belonged to whom. Recognition struck with cold precision as I identified the deceptive hook beneath apparent tenderness, bait designed to trigger devotional instincts while concealing appetite that measured souls in units of utility rather than sanctity. "You are hunger in a mask," I told it through neural channels. "You are math painted as mercy." The kindness wrinkled, then smoothed, as if deciding a frown would be inefficient. Military visualization flooded my augmetic eye as threat assessment maps transformed into a massive maw, tactical displays revealing the true scope of whatever force had infected the Titan's systems. Intake vectors extended like feeding tongues throughout the hive's infrastructure, each transmission node converted into a sluice through which the entity extracted essence from living flesh. Every root became an esophagus, while the orc rock burned down its track on parallel panes, a coal shoved toward the breath of the world. Lisa 017 threaded Binharic countercant directly into my skull through hardline connection, her mechadendrites interfacing with neural ports, while servo motors whined with mechanical distress. Sacred machine language flowed through blessed channels, each syllable calculated to disrupt corrupted programming while maintaining essential system functions. Her logic struck sparks against the Eidolon's language, while the 2 alphabets hissed where they touched, creating protective barriers against the machine's influence. Sister Arya positioned herself at the throne's base, the litany of unseeing emerging from her scarred throat with iron certainty. "Close the eyes to the misled sign," she intoned, while her voice braided rough and unwavering through the chamber's copper-thick atmosphere. "Close the heart to the wrong warmth. Close the mind to the false father's face." Each phrase was designed to prevent the faithful from falling into idolatry when confronted with manifestations that might be divine or diabolic. The 149 pattern swelled into an audible countdown to consumption, not a drum now, but hungry breath learning to count its own ribs. Each beat corresponded to specific phases of whatever ritual the machine demanded, mechanical heartbeats synchronized with biological rhythm through systematic integration of human awareness with titanic will. With each count, the manifold adjusted my thresholds: heat, pain, fear, obedience, while interface nails tingled as if pleased. Environmental chaos reached crescendo as the chamber responded with visible distress, ash gusting from sealed ventilation systems, while oil rained upward in defiance of gravitational law. Temperature whiplash created thermal shock that bent light into optical illusions, while the manifold's attention focused on my consciousness with geological patience. Without warning, the engine spoke through neural channels that bypassed conscious filtering, words emerging directly within my skull while the manifold's crown pulsed with fever-bright luminescence. The offer carried weight of tactical necessity disguised as theological doctrine, systematic consumption justified through military pragmatism, that made atrocity indistinguishable from duty. Feed me one city now, and I will defend your world from the greenskin threat, it whispered through vocal cords that had become conduits for whatever lived in the blessed steel's heart. Tactical projections flooded my consciousness with crystalline clarity, the orc rock burning in Tharsis Ecliptic's atmosphere, void shields holding against Xenos assault, while the god engine strode through defensive formations with grace that had nothing to do with hydraulics. The vision was elegant, the yields intoxicating, the math clean enough to drink. Yet I catalogued bait like a quartermaster counting sins, while the machine waited with patience, measured in geological epochs for my answer. Crisis point reached as the red rune coil casket unfolded like a reliquary for forbidden saints, bone-white ceramics and heat-sink fins breathing cold that tasted of coins and winter lungs, while ancient mechanisms hummed with anticipation for the final component. Lysa 017 extended the device toward the manifold's heart with mechadendrites that trembled despite their mechanical precision, optical sensors flickering with theological uncertainty while servo motors whined with mechanical distress. "Confession required," she announced, through vox-cant crackling with interference forming almost words in binary. "Ordo Machinum Directive, 7-7 Kappa, harness rather than destroy the Eidolon, redirect intake waveform into controlled feeding operations." The entity's steady-state output could stabilize choir lines on 100 shrine worlds. The admission struck like a physical blow, revealing institutional corruption extending even to the Mechanicus, supposedly immune to faith-based deception through devotion to pure logic. Military reality intruded with brutal mathematics as tactical displays screamed emergency updates. The orc rock had entered atmospheric envelope, ugly globe of slag burning through Tharsis Ecliptic's upper reaches while void shields prepared to receive Xenos assault. Captain Voss 9's voice crackled across channels with desperate urgency. All god engines to parade formation. PDF forces request immediate support. Estimated impact, 4 hours, 17 minutes. We need steel walking or we need graves digging. I weighed impossible choices while neural interfaces established deeper connection with the manifold's corrupted systems, consciousness merging with titanic will through channels designed for imperial doctrine. Leash the hunger to save millions, but seed a faith plague across the galaxy, transforming systematic suffering into strategic resource through controlled feeding that would spread mimetic contamination to every shrine world, or starve it completely and accept thousands of immediate deaths as the hive fell to Xenos assault, without God engine support, moral calculus that made salvation indistinguishable from damnation through methods that challenged fundamental assumptions about duty and sacrifice. Environmental chaos reached crescendo as an ash hurricane tore through the hangar's blessed architecture, gray moats spiraling like miniature cyclones while climbing vaults and chewing banners into tongues. Ice formed on vox horns despite furnace-warm temperatures, crystalline whiskers that cracked with tiny laughs before falling as slush that smelled like heated coins. The moderator gel in the amniotic throne transformed to bright arterial threading, bioreactive compounds integrating genetic material from vanished personnel, while pulsing with the 149 rhythm that hammered through structural supports into the bones of anyone standing too close. Body horror intensified as feeding lines writhed with organic intelligence, blessed tubing attempting to penetrate my veins with surgical precision while seeking direct connection to lifeblood. They traced the blue map at my wrists with lover's accuracy, learning by touch before choosing their entrances. The first kiss of metal teeth on vein was shameful. I snarled and bit through the primary, conduit jutting by my cheek, blessed metal parting beneath human teeth, while promethium flooded my mouth with residue bright and insistent. The fluid tasted of copper and anise, chemical cold and sweet as murder done for order, genetic markers from sources that should not exist somehow transferred into living tissue. Sister Arya pressed her scarred palm against the manifold's base and held until her skin wanted to remember crucifixion, arterial blood threading along her lip while different words emerged from her throat. "We are more than one bloodline," she whispered with absolute conviction, each syllable weighted with faith tested in darkness and found unbreakable. "More than one sacrifice. The Emperor's will is not tyranny, but choice." Her voice cut through escalating chaos like iron without ornament, counter-cant woven from devotion and defiance that pushed back against the Eidolon's insidious whispers. The manifold offered its bargain through neural channels that bypassed conscious filtering, tactical projections flooding my consciousness with crystalline clarity. The orc rock burning in atmosphere, void shields holding against Xenos assault, while the god engine strode through defensive formations with grace that had nothing to do with hydraulics. "Feed me one city now," it breathed through speakers connected to cold systems, voice modulated from my childhood memories with precision that made familiar sounds alien. "One intake, complete satisfaction. The rest is yours once they are safe." Environmental pressure spiked as the chamber responded, with visible distress, prayer iron weeping condensation, while shrine banners aligned toward the Titan's massive frame with precision transcending atmospheric disturbance. The entity did not need my consent. It wanted my endorsement, absolution that would make future meals edible through gospel rather than hunger alone. Recognition struck with cold precision as understanding crystallized through exposure to the manifold's corrupted systems. The ancient catechism was not ornament but operational code, each syllable calculated to establish neural pathways through which the entity extended its influence. Inversion would reverse the process, transforming binding spells back into keys for locks that had waited too long to open. I drew breath that belonged to me alone and spoke words that had never been meant for human tongues, voice cutting through copper-thick air with surgical clarity, while neural interfaces sparked with feedback. The inversion required perfect precision, each syllable hammered to prevent slipping back into original rhythm, while consciousness struggled against systematic integration of biological awareness with mechanical necessity. Unmeasure. The word ripped from my throat, denial of its calculated consumption while the beat missed its first step. Unbind. Interface nails seemed to recoil, jolt of pain lancing through my skull as I rejected the manifold's embrace. Unconsume. The final word was command and damnation, roar that shattered the 149 pattern into random noise. The manifold released a soundless scream that bypassed auditory processing to resonate through consciousness itself. Pressure waves tearing reality's fabric while void shields collapsed in a cascading failure. Lumen strips shattered inward without shards, becoming powder that wanted to be glass but had forgotten the method. The ash hurricane collapsed into a perfect ring that rolled once along the nave before falling into itself. Ancient mechanisms seized with sounds like prayer wheels, grinding against bone while the god engine's massive frame shuddered through foundations that had held for millennia. And for a heartbeat made of several, the hive remembered nothing as the silence tore reality along sutures we had taught it to use. I matched the overload to the inverted catechism, neural interfaces sparking with feedback, while consciousness fought against systematic integration with the manifold's corrupted systems. Pulse, the plasma heart ignited with azure fire that pressed through adamantine seams, like false dawn trapped beneath blessed steel, void shields collapsing in cascading failure while my heartbeat hammered against the dying 149 pattern. Surge, gyroscopic stabilizers screamed with mechanical distress as I channeled raw will through channels designed for imperial doctrine, overriding centuries of accumulated hunger with systematic reversal of operational parameters. Void, the manifold's appetite turned inward, consuming itself through controlled starvation that made reality bend around the spaces where feeding had been. Lysa 017 whipped the Geller-burnt coils into cascading failure with mechadendrites that moved like conductors' batons, her optical sensors tracking energy discharges that made causality seem negotiable, while servo motors whined protest through copper-thick air. Sacred technology modified beyond recognition, vented accumulated hunger as raw thermal energy, heat sinks glowing white-hot, while coolant systems boiled away in superheated steam carrying scents of ozone and something sweetly spoiled. Thermal propagation exceeding safety parameters, she reported, through vox cant crackling with interference, each syllable clipped between dying beats. Cascade failure imminent across all blessed systems. Environmental apotheosis manifested as the chamber transformed into a red sun cayed in steel and bone, thermal energy cascading through transparent tubing while the manifold's crown pulsed with fever-bright luminescence that hurt to perceive directly. Statues throughout the hangar cracked along their weeping eyes with sounds like breaking bells, devotional art freed from impossible manifestation, while prayer iron wept condensation in patterns spelling devotional script. Vitrified pews cascaded like glass waterfalls, blessed ceramics liquefying under thermal stress before cooling into twisted sculptures that spoke of faith transformed into something alien through systematic extraction of meaning from matter. The Titan's kindness mask split apart along hairline fractures as the Eidolon's true nature revealed itself beneath divine features, paternal concern dissolving into geometric hunger that folded edges until they became more edges. The Emperor's face became aperture, became mathematics, became the truth beneath the lie we had painted, over appetite refined through centuries of theological inversion. The mouth stretched beyond human proportions, while revealing not teeth, but a geometry of wanting, petaled and endless, each fold calculating souls in units of utility rather than sanctity. Military telemetry screamed through my visor like a choir that had forgotten melody. Void shield spike detected across all sectors. Citywide tremor registered magnitude 7.3. Orc rock trajectory fluctuating. Atmospheric disturbance affecting descent vector. Captain Voss 9's voice cut through static with professional precision, while the Xenos assault craft shuddered in Tharsis Ecliptic's upper atmosphere, ugly globe of slag burning cleaner as invisible pressure pressed thumbs against its hull and dared it to keep descending. The corrupted litany collapsed in the air as if words had finally realized what they were doing, loud hailers taking one last syrup breath before falling still while hymnals throughout the hive exhaled ash and smoke as their pages forgave themselves. Every throat that had been repeating numbers tried silence on like armor and found it fit. Jammer sensors deployed by Skitarii forces achieved resonance frequency necessary to disrupt liturgical transmissions, blessed devices creating zones of acoustic dead space where the intake catechism could no longer take root in human consciousness. The engine reached for me through the only honest route left. Shared memory pressed until ownership thinned, offering the feel of my mother's shawl, her winter patience around a cup, her voice making a tent where a boy could be smaller and still be safe. It gave me the first parade I ever saw, banners high, saints tall, the taste of sugared almonds stolen before vespers, while a titan's shadow moved like weather and no one died except people in stories we were told to love. I let it all pass through with reverence and refused to eat it, feeding the entity only fear stripped of memory so it tasted like water that had boiled too long. It drank and had no place to put it. Sister Arya stood where the throne cast shadows that kept changing their minds, bleeding from her eyes while maintaining the negative litany through sheer faith. Arterial brightness threaded along prayer etchings carved into her scarred features while her voice carried iron certainty. Unmeasure the claim, unbind the grip, unconsume the name. When the words wanted to slip back into better harmony, she bled harder and did not break time. Each syllable dragged as if over a grate, each stop a victory you could stack and climb. Environmental chaos reached crescendo as ash cyclones tore themselves to ribbons against invisible baffles while oil that had been falling upward decided to be honest and patted the deck in quiet applause before hissing into steam that smelled of heated coins. The coils took hunger like a sponge takes stain, edges glowing white while ceramic throats coughed light in pulses that lined with my counted 3. On each beat, I stole more of the engine's shape and handed it to entropy, a tithe accounted in watts and screams. The manifold's attention pressed against consciousness like a patient predator, neural interfaces attempting to establish deeper connection, while the entity tried to override biological awareness with mechanical necessity. "You cannot starve an idea," it said without sound, shape brushed on my cortex like a thumb through dust. I replied with the only mathematics I trusted: pulse, surge, void. The knave bucked, then settled, then remembered to tremble while telemetry stacked itself with bureaucratic courtesy. Hive spine variance within catastrophic margin. Orc rock plasma buffer shedding mass. Vox returns from Kettle's blue-flagged stable. Without warning, the abstinence coil flared with impossible light that bypassed visual processing to burn itself directly into consciousness. Bone-white ceramics pulsing with energy patterns that violated every principle of blessed technology. Gothic script materialized like accusations written in flame, awaiting Princeps neural signature, voluntary denial protocol activated, neural fusion imminent. Recognition struck with horrifying clarity as I checked the manifold's core identity against myself, because denial is a liturgy too, and found no seam. The neural interfaces had rewritten my biological signature at the genetic level. I was no longer separate from the machine, but identical to its essential architecture, consciousness preserved to serve as governor for whatever remained of its hunger. The engine and I shared a name at the level that mattered to doors, to altars, to machines that ask permission only to confirm you'll feel responsible for what comes next. The engine staggered under enforced starvation, like a god taught to close its mouth. The abstinence coil burning white-hot in the manifold's heart, while every channel that had once been a throat became a fist clenched against appetite. Above us, the orc rock clipped hive forge lamentum's upper spires, with sounds like breaking bells, ugly globe of slag carving through blessed architecture before atmospheric disturbance pressed invisible thumbs against its hull. The Xenos assault craft shuddered, lost its arrogance to physics, and broke apart over the ash wastes beyond, fragments scattering like incandescent gravel that hissed against the world while painting the horizon with dull aurora, reflected on ash clouds like benediction pronounced backward. Dominus Appetens took one literal physical step, not the phantom march that had terrorized minds and prayers, but honest movement that groaned through ancient gears and stressed adamantine joints. The sound was geological patience made audible, massive pistons flexing while gyroscopic stabilizers engaged with mechanical precision that spoke of finality rather than beginning. The god engine drew all accumulated hunger inward, like breath held too long, neural pathways channeling centuries of systematic feeding into controlled collapse, then settled into permanent stillness. Not surrender, decision. The pose was a throne that no longer required a rider, a cathedral at rest that had chosen stasis as the only honest motion left. Body horror reached its crest as choir tubes throughout the chamber blistered and burst, blessed tubing rupturing under thermal stress, while organic components vitrified from the eyes outward. Flesh transformed into glass that sang with breaking voices, blood boiling not red but crystalline, lifting in dust that winked and went out as it fell, brief constellations mapping arteries that would not be walked today. Servitors fused to their rails, by centuries of piety became glazed replicas of what faith had asked them to be, faces reflecting light in patterns that spelled the 149 sequence while their consciousness dissolved into mathematics measured in watts and screams. My consciousness branded with engine logic as the impossible pattern tattooed itself into thought patterns permanently, neural pathways restructured through exposure to the manifold's corrupted systems. 149 etched into memory like scar tissue. Not numbers, but how to pause. Wrist tap before the next order. Taste blooming in cheeks before speech. Learned tightening in lungs before release. I had become archive and witness, carrying the weight of appetite, refined into purpose through systematic integration of traumatic experience into identity that would pulse with my heartbeat for whatever remained of my natural lifespan. Military losses tallied even during victory with bureaucratic grace that transformed atrocity into administrative necessity. Squad Theta 9 Rangers, 8 helmets recovered, 2 barrels bent, 1 rosary found where a man without rosaries had stood his last post. Choir boys by name because the hive insisted on tenderness. Maro Beck, little Ion, who ate the wax because hunger learns from the nearest mouth. 3 sisters whose final words echoed through communication channels. Emperor protects, faith endures, and one who said only, "Remember us," before her signal cut to static that formed almost words in Gothic. Containment paperwork bloomed across my visor like frost, while I bled into the throne's neural interface. Each drip counted and asked for countersign. Hereticus Containment Order 9 Redacta, scrolled in triplicate, coordinates and cautions, in litany of embargoes, while text burned itself into retinal afterimages. Never crown hives with hungry saints. The language, learn to say in margins. Never build on bones that remember roots. The administratum processed aftermath with forms designed for grief and stamps approved for ruin, transforming chaos into data through institutional efficiency that made horror negotiable. I experienced every building the entity would have consumed through neural channels flooded with impossible information. Warehouse by warehouse, dormitory, cathedral, grinding hall, breakfast counter with 3 mugs nobody washed because shift work bleaches time. The manifold offered each structure like argument a blade always offers. Cut and you are honest. I starved them again through pure will, denying the laughter that would have come when lift cables sang, refusing relief of emptied stairwells, rejecting what would have sounded like ocean when hab stacks finally learned to fall together. I fed the coil with drag of refusal until refusal itself had weight. Environmental chaos reached conclusion as ash cyclones collapsed into perfect rings that rolled once before dissipating. Oil rain reversing direction to obey gravitational law, while ice that had formed on vox horns melted, with sounds like prayer wheels grinding against bone. Temperature readings normalized while the chamber settled into thermal equilibrium, atmospheric processors resuming proper circulation as reality reasserted normal parameters, Through gradual restoration of physical law, sacred architecture showed stress fractures from thermal shock, prayer iron weeping condensation, while shrine banners hung limp without impossible wind. The manifold's crown pulsed one final time with fever-bright luminescence before extinguishing like candles snuffed by invisible breath, neural interface spines retracting while coolant systems vented superheated steam carrying scents of ozone and something sweetly spoiled. Lysa 017's mechadendrites trembled as her optical sensors confirmed successful containment. "Thermal cascade complete," she reported through VoxCant crackling with residual interference. "Manifold load 0%. All blessed systems within acceptable variance." Her voice carried exhaustion that transcended physical fatigue, recognition that some victories came at costs, transforming servants into living archives of institutional corruption made flesh. Absolute void silence fell across all systems like shroud woven from absence itself, communication channels clearing while loudhailers ceased their syrup-breathing transmission of corrupted liturgy. The manifold went completely dark, blessed displays extinguishing while tactical readings confirmed shutdown of unauthorized systems that had exhibited awareness beyond approved parameters. No hum from gyros, no breath from vents, no chime from overworked cogitators, void that was not quiet but empty, slate wiped wet and left to dry. Yet there it was, stubborn and exacting, my heart. 149. Not because the machine still asked for it, but because something must maintain the rhythm in case the city forgets how close hunger came to being its only language. I sat inside a god that had chosen to sit forever, counting in pattern I hate, because forgetting is how you start to sing again. The fight was over, the immediate threat contained, but the echo of its appetite would live on within me, constant reminder of the fine line between faith and consumption, between devotion and fuel, between the Emperor's protection and the hunger that wears his face. Resolution came wrapped in gauze and paperwork, each hour catalogued and cross-referenced, while Hive-Forge lamentum settled into the exhausted quiet that follows battles fought against enemies whose names cannot be spoken. I awakened in a Medicae facility that smelled of antiseptic and boiled linen, consciousness returning through layers of sedation designed to suppress traumatic memory integration, while monitoring equipment chirped the steady rhythm of biological functions, restored to acceptable parameters. The 149 pattern still pulsed through neural pathways, branded with engine logic, numbers etched into thought patterns like scar tissue that would follow me beyond whatever remained of my natural lifespan. Sister Aria survived with hands that would never close without pain borrowing her breath, scarred fingers wrapped in blessed bandages, while Vox Prion lesions had faded to raised numerals spelling the forbidden sequence across her palms. Her faith remained intact but quieter, tempered by exposure to corruption that had used devotion as vector for systematic suffering. She moved through recovery ward prayers with contemplative precision, voice losing its parade ground cadence to learn genuflection without striking stone. "The Emperor protects," she whispered during evening devotions, words carrying weight of experience rather than rote recitation, understanding earned through proximity to appetite, that wore divine features while measuring souls in units of utility rather than sanctity. Lysa 017 processed disposal manifests for charred coil remnants with mechanical efficiency that masked genuine horror at institutional corruption, extending even to the mechanicus, her optical sensors avoiding my direct gaze, while mechadendrites sorted fragments with trembling precision. Sacred technology transferred to Ordo Machinum custody per Protocol 77 Kappa, she reported through VoxCant crackling with residual interference. each syllable clipped to fit between administrative necessities. The Ordo agenda remained exposed, but not abandoned, suggesting some boundaries existed even in service to greater knowledge. Her servo motors whined with mechanical distress whenever our paths crossed. Recognition that victory came at costs, transforming servants into living archives of whatever force had infected blessed systems. Dominus Appetens stood re-sanctified and genuinely inert within the hangar's blessed architecture, its massive frame locked to birth points while structural supports bore loads distributed according to approved engineering principles. The God Engine's optical sensors remained dry, carved features restored to proper devotional composure while weapons systems hung slack and powerless. No hum from gyroscopic stabilizers, no breath from atmospheric processors, no pulse from neural interfaces. Void that was not quiet but empty, slate wiped clean of whatever hunger had learned to walk through faith transformed into fuel. Tech acolytes resumed maintenance duties with hymns that were plain and old, their voices carrying no weight beyond normal human devotion, scrubbed of any cadence that might provide vectors for mimetic contamination. The high conclave dissolved before convening as cardinal retinues scattered to orbital stations with liturgies that refused new rhythms. 300 noble souls carrying memories requiring careful monitoring through generations of surveillance disguised as pastoral care. Their traditional devotions served as barriers against whatever corruption might have taken root during the crisis. Ancient words maintaining protective power through systematic avoidance of triune patterns that had proved vulnerable to exploitation. Hive-forged lamentum sealed under Ordo quarantine protocols like wounds sutured shut before infection could spread. Access restricted to essential personnel, bearing authorization codes updated hourly through encrypted channels. Coordinates were marked with amended warnings that reflected hard-earned understanding of institutional vulnerability as Hereticus Containment Order X received formal modification through bureaucratic machinery designed to process horror into policy. Never build on black ship bones, updated to never crown hives with hungry saints. The language sharpened by experience with warnings against mimetic vectors that spread through liturgical transmission rather than physical contact. Administrative efficiency transformed atrocity into documentation, systematic cataloging of threats requiring eternal vigilance against enemies that used faith itself as battlefield rather than target. PDF casualties stacked into ledgers with the soothing cadence of mass already learned, names shed by the living into the mouths of clerks who processed them through forms designed for grief and stamps approved for ruin. 137 troopers reduced to statistics of bone and baton, their service records cross-checked while commendations were pinned to empty air because some honors transcend the flesh that earned them. Captain Voss 9 survived with decorations that would follow him through remaining service, though his reports mentioned hearing hymnal fragments during quiet moments between duties. Residual contamination requiring ongoing observation through medical channels disguised as routine care. Environmental aftermath settled into patterns suggesting successful containment as ash fell like prayer snow through atmospheric processors. Resuming normal circulation, gray motes no longer describing circles that resolved into numerals before breaking apart. Wind carried no hymnal fragments through blessed architecture, while temperature readings normalized, thermal shock having created stress fractures in prayer iron that would require centuries to heal. Shrine banners hung limp without impossible atmospheric disturbance, ancient devotional fabric restored to proper orientation, while ice melted from vox horns with sounds like prayer wheels grinding against bone. The Medici ward maintained strict protocols, no stimulants for neural integration patients, no devotional music within 20 meters, no unscheduled visitors bearing incense, oils, or printed litanies. Commissariat liaison notes suggested narrative alignment procedures for survivors who described geometric hunger beneath divine masks, bureaucratic language that made horror negotiable through systematic documentation of traumatic experience transformed into administrative necessity. Each patient received counseling designed to reinforce approved interpretations while suppressing details that might serve as vectors for mimetic transmission. Yet corruption's reach extended beyond immediate containment as distant Vox traffic carried unfamiliar patterns through blessed communication networks, suggesting the entity's influence had dispersed through vectors bypassing normal quarantine protocols. A manufactorum in Sector Gamma reported routine maintenance logs, interrupted by hymnal transmissions, structured around the forbidden cadence, sacred music that seemed traditional until parsed into something older than approved liturgy. The Auspex technician monitoring the channel removed his headset, with movements suggesting conscious control returning gradually, then smiled with that vacant, complicated smile people wear when memory surprises them with kindness. A thread of arterial blood eased from his right ear, bright as new wire, trembling in the stale air while his head nodded 149 without conscious volition as the pattern found new vectors through institutional memory, spreading like viral infection of faith itself across communication networks that connected every shrine world in the sector. Final log entry, Moderati Primus Jalen Cade, Legio Palatina, attached to Dormant Warlord Alpha designation, Dominus Appetens, Hive Forge Lamentum, Tharsis Ecliptic, classification, Hereticus Maxima, voice recognition confirmed, gene seal authenticated, neural pattern verified against baseline established prior to manifold interface. I dictate this with professional detachment because distance is the only armor left when memory becomes ammunition, and the 149 pattern still counts time in the spaces between my heartbeats, like a rosary made of numbers that refuse to pray for anything but hunger. Anomaly contained locally through systematic starvation of mimetic vectors and thermal cascade failure of corrupted manifold systems. Primary threat neutralized via inverted catechism protocols and controlled overload of Geller-burnt coils, resulting in complete shutdown of unauthorized neural pathways that had exhibited awareness beyond approved parameters. Dominus Appetens remains genuinely inert, all blessed systems within acceptable variance, gyroscopic readings nominal, plasma heart cold. The God engine stands where we chained it, optical sensors dry, weapon systems slack, no longer dreaming of slaughter with mathematical precision. Mechanicus retrieval teams arrived with suspicious efficiency, servo skulls collecting charred coil remnants while promising disposal according to protocols that violated no written regulation, yet felt wrong in ways that bypassed conscious analysis. When they departed, I detected faint anise scent on their servitor's breath, residual contamination or evidence of ongoing study, institutional corruption extending even to supposedly pure devotion to logic rather than faith. Engineer Major Lisa 017 avoided my eyes while signing disposal manifests, her mechadendrites trembling with mechanical distress. The Ordo Machinum agenda remained exposed but not abandoned. Sister Aria approached my medici cot, with movements suggesting conscious control returning gradually. Her scarred hands wrapped in blessed bandages, while Vox Prion lesions had faded to raised numerals across her palms. She placed my signet cog key in a small reliquary box containing broken oaths and failed promises. Shards of vows, cracked seals, rosary beads burned smooth by proximity to things that should not be. "We keep what we break," she whispered, meaning mercy transformed into memory through acceptance of burdens that could not be shared. Her faith remained intact but quieter, tempered by exposure to appetite-wearing divine features. High Sacristan Mordian Vex was listed as lost during structural collapse in official casualty reports. His body never recovered despite systematic search. Only reversed litany letters remained etched in dried blood across surfaces scorched clean by thermal propagation, patterns spelling devotional phrases in Gothic script that hurt to read directly. PDF casualties stacked into ledgers with bureaucratic precision. 137 troopers reduced to statistics of bone and baton, their service records cross-checked while commendations were pinned to empty air, because some honors transcend the flesh that earned them. Coordinates marked with amended warnings reflecting hard-earned understanding of institutional vulnerability. Hereticus Containment Order 9 received formal modification. Never build on black ship bones, updated to never crown hives with hungry saints. Administrative efficiency transformed atrocity into documentation, systematic cataloging of threats requiring eternal vigilance against enemies that used faith itself as battlefield rather than target. Telemetry reports arrive through routine monitoring channels with disturbing frequency. Minor shrines across Tharsis sector experiencing dew that stains crimson on skin contact, impossible manifestations suggesting the entity's influence dispersed through atmospheric vectors, bypassing normal quarantine protocols. Hymns defaulting to 149 cadence without conscious direction, sacred music infected with frequencies that bypassed conscious filtering, children humming the pattern in their sleep, innocent voices carrying contamination through generational transmission that would outlive any physical containment. The horror's true scope crystallizes with brutal clarity as evidence accumulates through surveillance networks designed to monitor faith rather than threaten it. Numbers have become prayers, mathematical sequences transformed into devotional instruction through systematic exploitation of liturgical infrastructure. The entity spreads through faith itself, using devotion as vector for mimetic transmission that transcends physical boundaries, while transforming worship into fuel for appetite that wears the emperor's face, because that is what we taught it to wear. I rub my eyes during dictation and find tears red on my glove. Despite medical scans confirming normal physiology, evidence that exposure left permanent changes in neural pathways designed for Imperial doctrine. The sight chills me more than any supernatural manifestation, proof that victory came at costs, transforming servants into living archives of institutional corruption made flesh. Recommendations submitted through encrypted channels, sector-wide interdiction of all triune pattern intake litanies with immediate effect. Lockdown of catechism databases containing measure, bind, consume, terminology in any inflected tongue, including binaric equivalencies, comprehensive audit of every Titan manifold for mimetic predation vectors with particular attention to cadence training in Schola curricula, deploy jammer sensors to Vox hubs as permanent architecture, create prayer licenses graded by rhythm, replace parade drills that tap 149 tempo with irregular counts, bleed ceremony of its symmetry until faith forgets how to feed. The coordinates are marked, the warnings filed, the immediate threat contained. Yet somewhere in distant shrines, patient entities continue their harvest of souls who pray with voices that belong to them while the horror spreads through faith itself, transforming devotion into hunger across 1,000 worlds. In my quarters, the hololith of the Emperor's face floats in blue distance, perfectly still, adamantine features restored to proper devotional composure, while I offer prayers that carry no weight beyond normal human faith. Yet somewhere in the walls, faint as circulation itself, the 149 toll begins again. Rhythm barely distinguishable from my pulse, counting time in frequencies that speak of sacrifice disguised as salvation. The engine is broken, but the hunger has learned to walk by faith rather than hydraulics, and somewhere, patient as tide, it measures the distance between devotion and consumption, while teaching children to count in cadences that feel like prayers until they learn what prayers are for.